Oh, I have to do this one now? Isn't this the unholy ass crack of the Michael Myers franchise? Judging from a lot of the criticisms I've seen this movie get, you would think so. I've already stated in my earlier reviews that I'm not exactly a big Halloween fan. That's not to say that I don't respect the first film, but that's just it. As much as it did for the horror genre, the film by itself doesn't age very well. The performances are wooden, it seems to drag its feet, and Michael Myers isn't a very threatening killer. His mask makes him look like a walking mannequin, which has always been a problem for me. And yet, any slasher that came after it pretty much borrows something from it. The masked psychopath, the use of a relatively large, sharp object, the old man who knows how to kill the bad guy. It all started here, pretty much like what the Lord of the Rings books did for the realm of fantasy. So if there was any film that didn't call for a remake, you would think it would be Halloween. And yet, you'd really be hard-pressed to continue the series after Halloween Resurrection. After 7 films, Michael Myers finally killed his sister Laurie Strode, which is kind of like Wile E. Coyote finally besting the Roadrunner, and his house burns to the ground. Unless you're going to do something stupid like send him into outer space, the only way I can see this series getting new life is through a reboot. But was it necessary? A movie with this much praise never needs a remake. That's why I don't understand why movies like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory get the reimagining treatment. Horror remakes in general are nothing new. Whether you enjoy them or loathe them, the studios keep puking them out, and it just doesn't end. Usually my biggest beef with these remakes is that there's simply no creativity. They redo the same movie, up the gore, beef up the chief villain to unrealistic proportions, and the creative process stops there. Half the time it seems like the only reason they do these unnecessary remakes is so that McFarlane Toys can crank out another line of non-posable action figures. I'll freely admit that I really didn't like Rob Zombie's take on Halloween when I saw it in theaters. The only Rob Zombie film I've seen to date was The Devil's Rejects, and while I liked it for what it was, Zombie's style bared a take-no-prisoners mentality that I didn't really think was appropriate for a Halloween film. I've also heard that his film House of a Thousand Corpses is pretty warped and twisted, so bottom line, it was quite a strange concoction of bizarre and abstract. Seeing it now, though, I can say one thing. Even if you don't like it, when you compare it to the recent Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street remakes, Zombie at least tried giving it a little unexpected twist. This film actually goes above and beyond the movie that it's based on. Sure, he went overboard with the sex and the gore, but at the same time, this is a period in the horror genre when the audience kind of expects it. This isn't 1978, so to try to do a shot-for-shot remake isn't exactly the most commercial concept. Again, I'm not the biggest Michael Myers fan, so I'll try to approach this review as objectively as I can. The best way to really do that is to compare it to John Carpenter's original film. Keep in mind that while it isn't a scene-for-scene remake, it still follows the storyline pretty closely. Okay, so saddle up, because here we go. First, let's talk about the structure. The original film was pretty much a paint-by-number slasher. In the first 5 minutes, we establish who the killer is, 8-year-old Michael Myers. And then the film switches to present-day 1978, in which Michael escapes from Smith's Grove Sanitarium. From there, his doctor, Sam Loomis, tracks him down and tries to find him before Michael kills anyone. It's pretty straightforward, and the only explanation we get is a cryptic speech that Loomis gives about Myers' inner evil. This is the biggest overall difference between the original film and the remake, and a lot of fans seem to cringe at it. Zombie's film is really a 3-act play. In the first act, really the first hour of the film, we get this very detailed backstory of Michael as a 12-year-old boy. Right from the get-go, we see that he lives in a pretty messed up household. His mom, played by Sherry Moon Zombie, is a stripper, and she's dating an alcoholic, verbally abusive cripple. His sister Judith is a slut, and Michael himself spends his time locked up in his room torturing animals. This is the one point that I really can't defend, because not only is it unsettling, but it doesn't make much sense. Sure, it's a rough household, but it's still kind of hard for me to buy that this little boy for no reason tortures these animals. And he doesn't just torture and kill them, but he stores them in his backpack and takes pictures of them. That's pretty sadistic. Because of his girly looks, he gets teased by kids at school, not to mention his mom's abusive boyfriend.
Serious faggoty ass shit, man.
Judith, I'm gonna be late!
Judith, I'm gonna be late!
And so he goes on a really twisted killing spree. We then see Michael admitted to Smith's Grove, courtesy of his doctor Samuel Loomis, played this time by a very credible Malcolm McDowell, who tries talking to Michael about his whole thought process. It's here that we see Michael take an interest in making these really ugly yet simple masks. As time goes by, we're shown Michael's descent into insanity, as described by Loomis, until he no longer feels the need to show his face in public. Now this is all set up, and I'll tell you, they could have made an entire movie, basically a prequel, based on this kid. It's intriguing, and if you don't look at it as a remake, it's pretty horrific. The thought of this 12-year-old boy committing these crimes is so disturbing, and yet it's so much more effective than the vague explanation we got in the original film. The second act of the movie, where Michael escapes and makes his way to Haddonfield, is where we segue into the remake portion of the film, which basically mimics the original. We're introduced to Laurie, her friends Annie and Linda, Sheriff Brackett, and the two kids, Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace. Zombie pretty much reenacts all the kills, giving them the updated intensity they call for, until Michael finally runs into Laurie, and we get into the film's final act. The end of the film is also a departure from the original, and this is where the film starts to drag a little. I don't want to spoil the ending, but basically the chase scene is drawn out longer than it should have been, and there's a twist ending that will shock those of you who are too familiar with the original film. Then we have the characters. Laurie Strode is played by Scout Taylor Compton, who plays a realistically innocent teenager. Compton, understandably and thankfully, didn't want to portray the Jamie Lee Curtis version of the character. There's a big difference between being a goody two-shoes and being a social outcast. Curtis, I felt, played the latter. She just wasn't very realistic. The Laurie of this movie is kind of mischievous, but also has her morals. She lies, and she knows what sex is to the annoyance of her stepmom.
Guess what, Mom? Mr. Nichols touched me the wrong way. Oh, Mom!
Okay, that is so not funny.
You want a screwdriver, Mommy? You want a hammer? Look at this, Mom.
Laurie!
I'm sorry,
Stop!
sorry. Okay.
Are you eating?
No, I'll get something at school.
But aside from that, she's still the likable babysitter character. The two kids are also much more realistic, not stale like the actors from the first film, who both seem to drone their lines rather than act like kids.
Keep on marching. I am Queen Sheba, okay? Bow down and worship me.
The two more interesting casting choices are Brad Dourif as Sheriff Lee Brackett and Danielle Harris as Annie. Brad Dourif you might know from Child's Play. He's the voice of Chucky. He's also Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings movies. His character is kind of underplayed in this film, but he still does the role justice. Danielle Harris is an interesting choice just because she played another character, Jamie Lloyd, in the earlier Halloween film, so it's profound to see her back. And then there's Malcolm McDowell, who does a fantastic job playing Dr. Loomis. There's a sense with this character that his motivation stems from his wanting to sell copies of his book, The Devil's Eyes, which is an account of his experiences dealing with Michael Myers as a boy. He's a sympathetic character, much like how Donald Pleasance portrayed him, but at the same time it's nice to see him interact with Michael, which was something that was always missing from the first film. Now the movie is much more brutal than the original, and it definitely has that unsettling Rob Zombie feel to it, which I'm sure is something else fans like to complain about. But seriously, it tries to be more than just a reimagining. It borders on being a psychological thriller, and then kind of segues into full-on slasher mode. The best part of the movie is when we see Michael as a kid, because that's what gives Michael Myers his persona. It makes him seem as an adult more threatening, because there's a sense that we kind of know where he came from, and that's what gives this film an appeal. Michael, as big as he is, finally has a personality. Rob Zombie gave the character credibility. I would almost go as far to say that this film is better than the original. It's not for everyone, and if you're going to cling on to the original because of its sentimental value, then you're not going to like this one anyway. But for those who can see past labeling it as a rehash, reboot, remake, reimagining, or whatever, you might find that this one just has a little more pep and a little more thought behind it. And it's pretty scary too. As scary as a Rob Zombie film can be.
These eyes do not see what you and I see. Behind these eyes one finds only blackness, the absence of light. These are the eyes of a psychopath. Michael was created by a perfect alignment of interior and exterior factors gone violently wrong. A perfect storm, if you will. Thus creating a psychopath that knows no boundaries and has no boundaries.